He has been a fierce critic of the agency that President Donald Trump tapped him to lead. Now lawmakers are about to decide if Kash Patel should lead the FBI. And he's been one of the most influential GOP figures on the Senate floor for half a century. The emotional announcement from Senator Mitch McConnell. Plus, the last time these two countries faced off, brawled, broke out seconds after the puck dropped. The historic rematch as relations between the United States and Canada are on thin ice. And a former NFL player in handcuffs dragged out of a city council meeting while the whole thing happened over a library plaque. And rather than build a sand castle, why not make one out of snow? The beach in the South looking more like a ski destination than a place to surf. Welcome in to CBS News 24/7. I'm Mugo Odigwe. Right off the top, we have our eyes inside the White House. Any moment now, Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt will start the White House press briefing. Leavitt says she plans to tout the achievements of the Trump administration to honor 1 month since the president took office. CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman has a close eye on that briefing. Willie, thank you for joining us today. We understand the National Security Advisor will be in attendance alongside the Deputy Chief of Staff. So do we expect them to talk about the escalating tension between the United States and Ukraine?
Hey there, Mugo. Good to be with you. That's exactly right. I anticipate that this will be a lengthy part of the briefing. Now, the press secretary did kind of express what she hopes to pitch to reporters when this briefing starts, and that's perhaps a greatest hit list, so to speak, in terms of the priorities and what the White House sees as the successes for the first month as President Trump took over the White House, of course, 1 month ago today. But top of mind for not only us reporters here, but perhaps for viewers at home that are watching this situation unfold is this escalating tension between President Trump and President Zelensky of Ukraine. The two have really just traded barbs in public statements going back and forth just a few days ago. The president seemingly saying that Zelensky was a dictator without elections and criticized him for taking some $350 billion from the United States. Now, it's unclear what the president is talking about there in terms of that $350 billion. Some $183 billion has been set aside or appropriated by Congress, much of it to support Ukraine and pushing back that Russian assault. And the president also criticized and seemingly tried to say that Zelensky started this war. Let's remember the facts of the situation is that President Putin, Russian forces invaded Ukraine. That also happened in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea as well. So the president is seemingly bringing up these things that are not necessarily factually accurate. But the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, responding as well. But also want to bring up a quick tweet that Zelensky posted when he had a meeting with Keith Kellogg. He said he had a productive meeting with Keith Kellogg, a good discussion. Of course, those discussions follow the meeting between the Americans and the Saudis. The Saudis mediated that meeting, I should say, between the Americans and the Russians in Saudi Arabia. So more to come on this. We anticipate that this certainly will come up during that press briefing. You go.
Yeah, Willie, we know Trump is also expected to speak at the Republican Governors Association tonight, and on the agenda is balancing the federal budget. So will we see DOGE come up during that speech?
Yeah, oftentimes the president does have prepared marks for these types of events, but oftentimes he typically doesn't follow the script. I anticipate he will talk about some of the things that he views as successes, perhaps some of the things that he wants to do going into his second term. But DOGE, I anticipate, will be a huge topic of conversation. Perhaps some governors, Republicans even, may be concerned about the number of workers who are based in their state. Remember, these federal workers aren't just in Washington, D.C. and and DMV, as we call it, this region of the country. They are spread out all across this country, and many of them, some 30% of them, CBS has reported, are veterans as well. So some people who served their country being let go with these Doge-led layoffs. Now, the White House will say that Doge isn't necessarily in charge of anything, that Elon Musk isn't in charge of Doge, but that they make recommendations to these government agencies for them to make cuts. But the president does have a lengthy list of things that he could potentially talk about. As I mentioned, some of the successes, but also some of the cuts in federal spending that I anticipate he oftentimes brings up and could potentially talk about later this evening.
Okay, Willie James Inman reporting for us from the White House. Thank you so much for your time today. Turning now to our nation's capital and the breaking news coming out of the Hill today. First, Kash Patel clearing a key procedural hurdle to get one step closer to his final confirmation. A vote on that is set to take place later this hour. And this, the longest serving Senate leader in U.S. history, Mitch McConnell, will not seek re-election in 2026. He made that announcement on the Senate floor last hour. Listen in.
If it weren't for an 11th hour outside the box idea on the campaign trail, my Senate career would have been over before it began. Or that, if not for the people of Kentucky, time and again, agreeing that leadership delivers and electing me to send back here, it would have been someone else from somewhere else taking that seat at the table where I've had a chance to work, strategize, fight, and win. I grew up reading about the greatness of Henry Clay, but there were times when the prospect of etching my name into his desk in this chamber felt like more of a long shot than making it to the major leagues.
That moment got this standing ovation from other members.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the members and staff and spectators in the gallery be allowed to applaud for a period not to exceed 30 seconds.
Is there objection?
A period not to exceed 30 seconds. That was funny. CBS News congressional correspondent Torian Small is here with us today, live on Capitol Hill. Torian, thank you for joining us. You're following all of this. McConnell is not one to walk away from a fight. Did he say what brought him to this decision?
Well, I found the beginning of his speech to be pretty instructive. He's giving this announcement on the Senate floor on his 83rd birthday. He says he's one not to boast about the day, but he found this to be most apt, partially because, in my mind, he has experienced quite a bit of medical scares over the past couple of years. He had two freezing moments during press conferences in a very public manner that called into question his mental acumen or physical acumen to do this job in a prolonged period, which is also why we saw him not come forward a few years ago and decide whether or not he was going to seek an 8th term, which is pretty monumental. To put that into perspective, 40 years plus he's been in this job, and as we've mentioned quite a bit, he's the longest serving party leader in the Senate, well accomplished there, often known for his very public battles with President Trump, and most recently his consistency to buck with the party on more controversial confirmation picks. We saw after he gave his speech, he was on the floor greeted by a bipartisan group of senators, including Lisa Murkowski of Alaska and Susan Collins of Maine. The three of them have been the usual suspects in holding the line against Trump's picks. I should say unsuccessfully, as every one of them have made it through despite their protests.
Right. Torian, the reaction from this already pouring in, including from those who are maybe looking to throw their names into the hat here. Do we know who wants the seat?
Yeah, so quite a few Kentucky politicians are throwing their hats in the race. Andy Barr previously came out with a statement saying that he was considering this, and this comes after CBSNews.com first confirmed that sources close to him at a GOP retreat said that he was seriously considering this if McConnell decided not to run again. Daniel Cameron, as you can see on the screen here, former Attorney General for Kentucky, also gubernatorial candidate in 2023, unsuccessfully lost that race to Andy Beshear, is throwing his hat in the race. He's interesting because he is considered a protege of Mitch McConnell, very close ties to the senator, and he's making his intentions clear with the announcement that he put on his social media.
Okay, Tori, and I want to switch gears here and talk about Kash Patel because his final Senate vote, for final confirmation vote, expected very soon. What do we expect to happen there?
Well, it's expected that he'll, like every other pick before him, will clear the Senate and ultimately get to work sooner than later. Listen, there are 3 Senate Republicans, as I mentioned, that will likely vote against him. That's Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and Mitch McConnell. That will be no votes potentially, but the math isn't there for Democrats hoping that could be enough. It would require 4 defectors in order for his nomination to be blocked. And in lieu of that, it's likely that we'll see Vice President Vance on the Hill again to cast that tie-breaking vote. Democrats are concerned about what this could mean for law enforcement, federal law enforcement agencies, and whether or not there could be this air of independence from the president's office and the FBI. Kash Patel is a staunch Trump loyalist. He's previously, which Democrats have brought up before, talked about retribution for political enemies of the president. They're making their case, albeit unsuccessfully now, and they're now facing the American people saying this is who the president is looking to install into these government agencies. But again, it's likely that Patel will be cleared and he'll be headed to the FBI sooner than later.
Okay, CBS News congressional reporter Torian Small, as always, thank you for joining us on the stream. 2 teenage girls have been arrested for allegedly planning what the FBI is calling a mass casualty attack at a high school. What we know so far, that's ahead. You're watching CBS News 24/7. The Vatican says Pope Francis is showing signs of improvement. Today is the Pope's 7th day in the hospital. He has been battling pneumonia in both lungs. The Vatican says the Pope had a peaceful night of sleep. He got out of bed, ate breakfast, and even did some work with his aides at the hospital. This comes after the Pope's blood tests yesterday showed a slight improvement in inflammation. To the Middle East now, where Hamas has returned the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages. The remains are believed to include a mother and her 2 young children. Hamas has said all 4 were killed, along with their guards, in Israeli airstrikes. And this weekend, more living hostages are set to be released. This is all part of the ongoing ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. CBS News foreign correspondent Deborah Pata reports from Israel about the latest in this fragile ceasefire.
A somber day in Israel. For the first time, Hamas released the bodies of 4 dead hostages abducted on October 7. The handover took place under a grim Gaza sky this morning with 4 black coffins on display. Hamas says they are the bodies of Oded Lifshitz and the Bibas family, Shiri and her 2 young boys, Ariel and Kafir. It also claims they were killed in an Israeli air raid in November 2023, but still no official Israeli confirmation of this. The first phase of the fragile ceasefire in Gaza ends on the 2nd of March. Negotiations for the second stage are supposed to commence in the coming days. The families of hostages who have not yet been released say Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu cannot stop negotiating now. He needs to bring everyone home. And Palestinians who have endured over 15 months of this brutal war that has cost the lives of nearly 50,000 and flattened much of Gaza say they simply cannot go back to that again. But this round of negotiations is going to be a lot harder. At stake, the question of who will control Gaza. Back to you.
Our thanks to Deborah Pata for that report. And now to San Diego County, where a Cal Fire captain was found stabbed to death inside her own home. Police right now are still searching for a suspect. Deputies found 49-year-old Rebecca Marodi dead on Monday. She was a 30-year veteran firefighter stationed in French Valley, just north of Tequila, California. First responders paid tribute in a procession as her body, you see here, was taken to the medical examiner's office. Detectives say they believe Marodi knew the killer and are treating this case as a potential domestic violence incident. We follow our map to an ICE facility in Florida where a hazmat team investigates a package containing a suspicious white substance. This is in Miramar, just 20 miles outside Miami. Police say shortly after someone walked into the building with the package, security who touched that package started feeling sick. That prompted a partial evacuation of the ICE facility. Right now, officials say there is no immediate threat to public safety, but we are watching the story and we'll update you as soon as we learn more. In Houston, the feds arrested 2 teenage girls on suspicion of plotting an attack on a high school. We're not just talking about any attack here. The FBI is calling it a mass casualty attack involving pipe bombs and guns. CBS News correspondent Janet Shamlian is just outside the school that was targeted with the latest on the investigation and how police learned about the plan in the first place.
A potential tragedy averted here at Memorial High School in Houston. Authorities say they arrested 2 teenage girls, 16 and 15, who reportedly threatened to kill students with guns here and also place pipe bombs in the school. The students' names have not been released. We know the 16-year-old has been charged with making a terrorist threat. We do not know charges for the 15-year-old. Both are in custody at this time. How did this happen? Authorities say there were very credible threats posted on social media. Someone alerted the FBI. The FBI then alerted the local police department for the school, as well as the Houston police office and a sheriff's department here. They had both of those girls in custody within 30 minutes. So it goes to the adage, if you see something, say something. This was a potential tragedy averted. We don't have the names on this, and we don't know whether there were actually any bomb-making materials found. We don't know whether there were guns or pipe bomb-making materials. But authorities say this is what happens when people are alert and call when they see something. Back to you.
Thanks to Janet Shamlian for that report. Now let's go to New York City because we're keeping a close eye on Mayor Eric Adams' corruption case. The judge overseeing the case could approve or deny the motion to drop the corruption charges at any moment. On Wednesday, there was a hearing in which both sides, the government and Adams, agreed the charges should be dropped so Adams can focus on President Trump's immigration policies. Staying in New York, the Trump administration pulled the plug on the city's controversial congestion price toll just weeks after it started. The intent is to curb heavy traffic by charging drivers higher fees in busy areas during business hours. But the Department of Transportation called it unfair to working class Americans and small business owners. New York Governor Kathy Hochul and the Metropolitan Transportation Authority have promised to fight that decision in court. And a powerful winter storm brought snow and ice in many states, including Virginia. CBS News correspondent Dave Malkov is in Virginia Beach, showing us the rare weather there and the hundreds of car crashes the weather has caused.
This is Virginia Beach. This is not the middle of Alaska. Actually, in Anchorage, Alaska this morning, it was warmer than it was here in Virginia Beach. What I'm standing on is, I guess you could call it sand. It is a combination between snow and sand, and you can see the line right here. And when this sand gets together, it creates what's basically a concrete. You can barely get through that, so that is going to be difficult to get back from. A lot of people driving on top of all this blowing and drifting snow today. That was very dangerous. We had about 500 accidents just here in the state of Virginia. People were drifting all over the roadways. There were some people who were going off of the roadways. I passed a half dozen accidents on my way here from the Richmond airport, so it was a very long way to go. But look at how people are reacting to this. You can see that kid over there creating maybe a snowman, maybe a sandman, maybe a sandcastle or a snow castle. It's very strange to see this. This is how rare this is. This has only happened about maybe 10 times in the past with this much snow in this region, but those records go back to the post-Civil War era in the 1890s. You have to go back that far to see something this unusual to happen on Virginia Beach. All the sand around us, and it will be around for a while because the roads are covered in this and it's very difficult to drive. On Virginia Beach, I'm Dave Malkoff, CBS News.
Yeah, aside from the water behind Dave there, you can't tell that's a beach anymore, right?
No.
Because of the snow that came down.
And did he intentionally try to add the words snow and sand together?
Sand, yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool.
He did.
I was like, did he make that a mistake? Because it kind of works in this scenario.
It does work. It does.
All right, well, Virginia Beach saw heavy amounts of snow, anywhere up to around 10 inches locally in that community, but we continue to see that storm system track offshore. But what we're not done with just yet is the cold air that follows that system. Now, the jet stream dove well low, or I should say extremely low, in the sense of making its way down into the south. So what that did for us is it brought in these storm systems closer to Alabama and Georgia, and now it's starting to push offshore as we head into the afternoon hours. The other thing to mention too, though, we're still left with those daytime highs freezing widespread throughout communities like New Orleans, Atlanta, Charlotte, and all the way up into the north to Kansas City today. Our feels like temperature sitting at negative 17 degrees. It's negative 30 all the way up into North Dakota. So the National Weather Service has issued extreme cold warnings and advisories widespread throughout all these states, but they're slowly starting to expire, actually. We're seeing improvements as we head into the coming days, so get a good look behind me. I want to show you where that storm system was. It swept throughout Florida, it swept throughout the Carolinas, and now it's tracking offshore as we head into the afternoon hours today, leaving behind these frigid temperatures as this polar vortex still impacts millions throughout the states. Now, as we head into this weekend's forecast and early next week, we'll catch a break. But for the time being, with the exception of Miami, 5 degrees above average, the rest of us in the south are dealing with frigid cold temperatures. Our departure from normal, meaning where we should be compared to where we're at. We're 33 degrees below where we should be right now over into Kansas City. A similar trend into Des Moines, Iowa, and we make our way off into the east just near Virginia Beach, where that live report was from. It is a chilly setup for us as we head into this afternoon, and we're still dealing with potential record cold highs as we head into this afternoon too in cities like Memphis, Oklahoma, and Kansas City. The best thing I could say, we actually have a warming trend right around the corner into the next 6 to 10 days. The Climate Prediction Center is showing that off into the south and up into the mid-Atlantic, where we dealt with extreme flooding earlier this week, and on top of that, these frigid cold temperatures that last into this weekend. Back over to you.
All right, Jess, thank you. Delta Airlines says it's offering $30,000 to each of the passengers in this week's crash at a Toronto airport. All 76 passengers and 4 crew members on board survived. 21 passengers were hurt, but Delta says as of today, all of them are now out of the hospital. So happy to hear that. A paramedic who was on that Delta plane that crashed in Toronto was honored for his heroism. Peter Carlson received an award just yesterday for jumping into action to help other passengers.
I was comfortable with how my body and mind empowered me to do what I needed to do at that point, period. I was able to kind of see the objective nature, I guess, of the challenge in front of us, which again was to get away from threat. And threat at that point was the smell of jet fuel and seeing jet fuel come down the window and just being trapped in a aircraft with a whole bunch of strangers that really came together, banded together, worked together.
Carlson has a cut on his head and some bruises, but says he's just glad everyone is alive. Thank you to him for stepping in. President Trump's threat to put a 25% tariff on all imports from Mexico has one particular industry paying close attention. We're talking about tequila. Did that get your attention? Well, stay with us. That story when we come back. You're watching CBS News 24/7. Welcome back. A lot of people watching the sparring between President Donald Trump and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. Vice President J.D. Vance addressed the ongoing negotiations between the United States and Russia to end the war in Ukraine earlier today. He had this to say during the annual Conservative Political Action Conference. Take a listen.
What makes him such an effective negotiator, I've seen this in private, is that he doesn't take anything off the table. When he walks into negotiation, he says everything is on the table. And of course, that makes the heads explode in the American media because they say, why are you talking to Russia? Well, how are you going to end the war unless you're talking to Russia? You've got to talk to everybody involved in the fighting if you actually want to bring the conflict to a close. And I know the president does. But I'll tell you the goals that animate President Trump's policy. It's really simple. He wants the killing to stop. He wants to bring lasting peace to Europe. He doesn't just want to stop it now and have the war restart a month from now. He wants to bring lasting peace to Europe because the president believes this, and he's absolutely right. Peace is in the interest of Russia. It's in the interest of Ukraine. It's in the interest of Europe. But most importantly, peace is in the interest of the American people, and he's going to fight for it for the remainder of his administration. Wherever war breaks out, he's going to be the president of peace.
And on that note, CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro joins us now from inside that conference. Aaron, thanks for joining us again. What were your takeaways so far from the vice president's comments?
Mugo, good to be with you. Yeah, I thought it was really notable what he said and maybe didn't say when it came to Ukraine. You saw in print interviews yesterday that Vice President Vance criticized Zelensky, saying that he would regret, quote, bad-mouthing President Trump as the two were kind of going at it a little bit. This time, a little bit more of a peaceful tone, saying that he believes President Trump is the only one that could, get an actual ceasefire done.
And we also understand Elon Musk will speak later today. He received high praise from J.D. Vance. So what are we watching for there?
Yeah, throughout the speakers I've been listening to today, a lot of them talked about wanting a Doge in California, wanting a Doge in the United Kingdom, as former Prime Minister Liz Truss said. So there's a lot of love for Elon Musk here and his effort with the Department of Government Efficiency. One thing I will be watching out for, and this is maybe more of a palace intrigue thing, is that Elon Musk will be speaking shortly before Steve Bannon, a close advisor throughout the years to President Trump, who has been highly critical of Elon Musk in recent weeks. Surely a dynamic there to watch. But Elon Musk addressing Doge, addressing what he wants to do in space are some of the topics I'm going to be watching out for when he speaks later this afternoon around 4 p.m.
Okay, Aaron, we know you'll keep a close eye on all of that for us. Thank you so much again for joining us. So now let's bring in Yulia Sabina Joja for more on the war in Ukraine. She is a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute. Yulia, thank you so much for joining us. The highly anticipated press conference between Trump's Ukraine envoy, Keith Kellogg, and President Zelensky was canceled at the request of the United States. The two leaders still met just moments ago. Does this signal progress in these negotiations?
Thanks for having me, Mugo. First of all, it is a bit unclear whether this signals progress because the rhetoric on both sides, particularly on our side, the American side, has been very inflammatory. And from the negotiations we have seen bilaterally with the United States and Russia in Riyadh a few days ago, and the format of these negotiations without Ukraine, without the Europeans, it has not been clear to either the Europeans or even here in Washington, what is it that we are pursuing? Are we pursuing European security and peace? What are we actually offering on the table? And what are our objectives beyond saving future lives? It's also unclear what we are demanding from the Ukrainians and whether that is to any extent a fair deal. So with all these unknowns and with the war waging on in Europe and Europeans feeling like they're being thrown under the bus, let alone the Ukrainians themselves that are bearing the big burden of all of this, it's very unclear at the moment to what extent we're actually making progress.
And Yulia, we have been watching the White House press conference, which is happening right now as we speak. The administration is updating us on their latest talks on the Russia-Ukraine war. And we know Zelensky, he has promised to not accept the results of negotiations between the United States and Russia if they, Ukraine, are not involved. So what kind of strategy does Ukraine have here if the U.S. decides we're just going to pull our support?
Well, indeed, Ukraine has a few less options than they had on the table, say, a few weeks ago, due to the new Trump administration coming to power. But what President Zelensky has been alluding to, sometimes in explicit terms, is that if we are looking at a United States withdrawal, not just from supporting Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty in this conflict against Russian aggression, then he has turned to the Europeans, asking the Europeans to pitch in more. And that's something that we've been talking about on both sides of the Atlantic for a long time. But what we need to know here, particularly here in Washington in this context, is that the Europeans have been pitching in the absolute majority, more than 50% on military aid, overwhelmingly more than 50% on humanitarian and financial aid. So they do have the means to take on more responsibility for European security. But the question on everybody's minds at the moment is the United States still in? Are we still supporting our allies and partners on the other side of the Atlantic, or are we actually turning 180 degrees and representing or pursuing rather the interests of Russia, with a lot of rumors right now going around that the United States is even considering the withdrawal of part of or the entirety of troops that we have in Europe, so a lack of support in the future. So tensions are running really, really high, but Zelensky, in the absence of U.S. support, at least what it seems to be, the absence of U.S. support, is turning to the Europeans.
And we'll see what happens as these conversations continue. Yulia, Sabina, Georgia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Mugo, for having me.
And staying abroad, with President Donald Trump's looming threat to impose 25% tariffs on all imports from Mexico, tequila producers there fear the duties could pose major challenges. So back in 2023, the U.S. imported $4.6 billion worth of tequila and $108 million worth of mezcal from Mexico. If Trump goes through with his tariffs, Mexico's president says Mexico will hit back with its own tariffs on the United States, and that could drive up the cost of tequila for customers in the U.S. Tequila producers fear if their product becomes more expensive, shoppers will just have to opt for cheaper options in the liquor aisle, driving away business. Moving along now to some sad news. A Secret Service dog who became the most decorated canine in U.S. history is dead. Hurricane was 16 years old. He received several honors for protecting President Barack Obama and his family. This is the 2014 incident where Hurricane became super famous. He stopped a man who jumped the White House fence and almost made it inside the building. Hurricane was medically retired from service back in 2016. He lived the rest of his life with his handler, who founded the nonprofit Hurricane's Heroes. It funded veterinary care for retired law enforcement and military dogs. Thank you to Hurricane for all of your service. A former NFL punter is arrested in Southern California for an anti-Trump protest during a city council meeting. The details after the break. You're watching CBS News 24/7. Welcome back. So what do you do when you see something crazy? You pull out your phone, of course. I mean, personally, I would run away. But most of us will pull out our phones. And that is exactly what these tourists on the slopes of erupting Mount Etna in Italy did. Did you see that video? Now Italian authorities are frantically warning them to put the camera down and stay away. Authorities say eager photographers, hikers, and thrill seekers are crowding the streets and blocking paths of rescue crews. The mayor there reminding the community explosive lava flows are extremely dangerous. Yeah, clearly you can see that in that video. From one eruption to another, Hawaii's Kilauea volcano, one of the world's most active volcanoes, erupted for the 10th time since December. Sightseers observed Mother Nature work at safe overlook sites. USGS cameras also giving us a great view of the volcano in real time. Its spout slowed down a bit, but you can see it's still spewing out lava on the right of your screen there. Kilauea is about 200 miles southeast of heavily populated Honolulu. Scientists don't appear alarmed, but say they are watching gas emissions and impacts on air quality. Meanwhile, a large part of the United States dealing with some bitter cold temperatures. Meteorologist Jessica Birch here again to tell us about this. I feel like you've been really busy for the past week. More than a week, actually. We've been talking about weather after weather after weather.
It has been one big story after the next in the States recently. And right now we're still dealing with that polar vortex. It dropped temperatures down well below zero throughout most of the states, impacting millions. And we're not done with it just yet. So as we take a quick look at what's happening for us this afternoon, our feels-like temperatures today are still impacted by that polar vortex, bringing in chilly, frigid temperatures as that storm track starts to move offshore. We'll see lingering snowstorms this afternoon into states like Pennsylvania, West Virginia, all throughout the mid-Atlantic. But at the same time, just behind that, we're also dealing with these cold, chilly temperatures stretching down to the border of Mexico, all the way from the border of Canada, with daytime highs today, or the feels-like temperatures, at -30 in North Dakota, 9 degrees in Denver, -17 all the way over into Kansas City. Getting a good look behind me, we mentioned this earlier, that storm track is now pushing offshore, but throughout the past 24 hours, it impacted millions throughout the south and throughout the mid-Atlantic with wintry, chilly temperatures. I mean, just earlier, we were talking about Virginia Beach getting close to around 10 inches of snow. Now, we are starting to dry up, and we're also starting to warm up as we head into this weekend and early next week. But for the time being today, we're still 20 degrees below where we should be in the south. We're about 30 degrees below where we should be off near Kansas City, all the way down into Oklahoma City, and a similar trend just along that eastern coast. Now, in those exact same areas, the Climate Prediction Center for the next 6 to 10 days is actually showing near normal temperatures for our daytime highs, which means there's relief on the way. And even better, we're seeing above normal temperatures right around the corner for the west coast. This will be the next big story as daytime highs are approaching above average conditions right around the corner. But you're right, it is one story after the next. And right now, I still want a jacket when I look at half those live shots out there.
Same. And much respect and thank you to all the reporters that we've spoken to.
That's so true.
That's not easy. It really isn't. Thank you, Jess.
Cheers, yeah.
The U.S. and Canada hockey teams face off again following the previous game where brawls broke out over and over. Do you remember that? Well, details when we come back. Welcome back. It is the U.S. against Canada as hockey teams from both countries fight for the Four Nations Face-Off trophy. It is fair to say that relations between the United States and Canada have been tense over President Trump's policies. And when the teams last played on Saturday, there were 3 fights. Yeah, in just the first few seconds, even before the puck drop. Canadian fans in Montreal booed the American national team. That is just rude. And of course, they got the same treatment from American fans 2 days later. So fans booed the Canadian national anthem during the Four Nations hockey tournament game played in Boston on Monday. Sean McIndoe, a senior NHL writer with The Athletic, joins me now. Sean, thank you for being here. What do we expect to see tonight?
Boy, that's a great question. That's what we're all wondering. I think you're going to see a ton of intensity, both from the crowd and from the players. I do not think you're going to see the same sort of game that you saw on Saturday with all the fights early on. I wouldn't be surprised if there was none of that tonight, just because the game itself is so important. Saturday night was a very important game, but it wasn't a must-win game. This is one game, winner take all. There's some good players on both sides, pretty much exclusively, and nobody wants to be sitting in the penalty box for 5 minutes when a world championship is potentially on the line. So it is certainly possible things could get out of hand, but if you're tuning in expecting to see the bad blood, I wouldn't be surprised if it manifests itself more in terms of the hits and the scrums and that sort of thing. Maybe not necessarily guys dropping the gloves and squaring off one-on-one.
Okay, so I guess the question then is, who is favored or expected to win this game?
Yeah, it's a tough one because this is a case where I think if you look at the skaters, which is to say the forwards and the defensemen, 1 through 18 on both teams, it's an edge to Canada, but it's a small edge. And it's much smaller than what we're used to seeing in this matchup over the years, where, of course, this is, in theory, at least Canada's game, and Canada usually is used to having the best team. They've got the best player in the world, Connor McDavid. He's looked fantastic over the last few games. They've got the guy who passed the torch as best player in the world to Connor McDavid in Sidney Crosby. He looks revived. He's been great. So is Nathan McKinnon. So at the very top end, the best players in this tournament have been Canadians. That said, the depth on the American side, better than we have ever seen it before. The high-end talent, better than we've ever seen it before. Slight edge to Canada on the skaters, but then you get to the goalies, and that's where the really big edge appears for the United States. They have Connor Hellebuyck, the best goaltender in the world, period, right now. And Canada does not have anything that matches up with that. They're going to have Jordan Binnington, who has won a Stanley Cup, in fact, won a Stanley Cup in a Game 7 in this building in Boston 6 years ago. So he's used to the big games, but he is not a guy that can match Connor Hellebuyck in terms of the stats or just in terms of how well he's been playing for years now. That is the big edge. And if you're an American fan and you're looking for a reason to feel that optimism that finally we can take these guys down and we can get that crown that we've been trying and chasing for 2 decades now, goaltending is the reason. Connor Hellebuyck, best goalie in the world, he's American, and it's head and shoulders compared to what Canada can offer.
They've been chasing that for 2 decades? I had no idea. So I guess the last question for you is, with the outcome of the game, regardless of who wins, will that make things in terms of the relationship for both teams? Will that make it worse or better?
I mean, it's going to be a devastating loss for whichever country loses this. I mean, for the United States, just purely from a sports perspective, how many times do you need to have the table set perfectly in front of you to finish the script, to finish the story, so to speak, and not get it done? They had this chance in 2002 in the Olympics on home ice. They had a chance at the rematch 2010 in overtime in Vancouver. Canada wins again, both of those matchups. So it's going to be very tough to swallow having it happen yet again, if it does, to Team USA. And then you compare Canada. I mean, up here in Canada, we expect to win every tournament. It's a national crisis if we don't win under the best of circumstances, let alone right now where you've got the president running his mouth and making it feel as if there's an existential threat to Canada from this country. It matters a lot to Canadians up here now to lose.
Sean, I'm hearing we're running out of time, but thank you so much for joining us. We so appreciate the context and the insight that you gave us today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
In Southern California's Orange County, a vote over a plaque for a public library turned into a heated political debate at the Huntington Beach City Council meeting. So heated that former NFL player Chris Kluwe ended up in handcuffs and dragged out of the meeting. You see that in the video. The controversial plaque was meant to mark the 50th anniversary of the Huntington Beach Central Library, but it received some pushback, with the first letters spelling out MAGA. Magical, alluring, galvanizing, and adventurous. The wording at the bottom adds fine print, which ends with the words, "Make America Great Again." Tensions flared over the plaque at a recent city council meeting.
I will now engage in the time-honored American tradition of peaceful civil disobedience.
Get the heck. Get out.
And you saw that moment there as police officers rushed to arrest him. He, of course, posted on social media saying that it was a peaceful protest. So we'll see what happens now. Thank you for joining us here on CBS News 24/7. We appreciate your time. We'll see you tomorrow.